The essential question for this video is, how do I evaluate a function? How do I evaluate a function? And the main word here we're looking at is evaluate. What does evaluate mean? So let's take a look at that. Here's the definition, or the answer to this question. To evaluate a function means to plug in an input value, which usually is our x-axis value, and then calculate what the output value will be. The output value is usually the y-axis value. So when we evaluate a function, we plug in an input and we get an output. Let's take a look at some basic parts of a function. You should remember these from last year. So if we take a look at this, here is a function. We've got f of x equals negative 4x squared plus 4x plus 8. Now the first thing you notice, class, is I didn't say f parentheses x parentheses. I said f of x. And here's the reason why that is. This letter f is actually the name of the function. So in this case, the function name is f. You can have all sorts of different function names. You can use whatever letter you want. In fact, you'll see in the next examples that we've got a function named g and a function named h. Those are the most common function letters that we're going to be using. So there's the function name. And notice I didn't say fx, I said f of x. So when you read function notation, you're going to read this. Let's put in here as a note, read as f of x, f of x. If this variable was t, you'd say f of t. If it was another letter like a, you would say f of a. So when you read these in class, make sure you are reading them correctly. So here's our function name, f. We say this is f of x. And now take a look. Whatever variable is in parentheses, that's the variable that's going to show up in the expression over on the right-hand side. So that this was f of t, this would have said negative 4t squared plus 4t plus 8. All right, let's note two more things before we actually evaluate some functions. The first thing is, let's take a look at this. This variable right here, x and x, this is called our input value. Input value. And that is usually the value that gets graphed on the x-axis of a graph. So if we had an actual graph laid out here, probably this input value is going to be graphed on the x-axis. Over on the left-hand side, this f of x, this is typically called our output value. And that is usually graphed on the y-axis. So if you, again, we'll just draw here, if you had a graph, typically this output value is going to be plotted on the y-axis. So the reason we call it input is usually you go in, or you put the value that you know in the variable on the right, and then you evaluate that expression, and out comes the output value. In with the x-axis, out with the y-axis. All right, let's go ahead and evaluate a couple functions just to get practice with this. Again, you've done this before, but normally with linear equations last year in Integrated Math 1. So here is a linear equation. F of x is equal to 4x minus 8. And we're going to go ahead and come up with a value that we're going to use for x. So let's just say in this case, let's evaluate the function for x equals 3. So we're going to assume that x equals 3. When we do that, we're going to rewrite our function. Now it's no longer f of x. Now it's f of 3 is equal to 4 times 3 minus 8. Now I know you can do this math, probably do this in your head. You'd say, okay, so we're going to evaluate the first term. 4 times 3 is 12. And then it's 12 minus 8. and 12 minus 8 equals 4. That would be our function for the value x equals 3, or we can say it f of 3. Now I want to show you something. Notice that when I wrote my function over again, I put the variable in parentheses. You've probably heard me say this already. Whenever you plug a number into a variable, always insert parentheses. Here's the biggest reason why. Because as these get more complicated, you're not going to want to have to do all this math in your head or manually. You're going to want to put it in your calculator. And that is actually very easy to do as long as you use parentheses properly. So in this case, we would type it in exactly the way we see the expression here. 4, and then I'll use parentheses. Your calculator will have a parentheses. Then we'll put that in the 3 in parentheses and close the parentheses. And then we're going to subtract 8. And when I press equal, it's going to do the math for us. And you see the answer for f of 3 is equal to 4. Let's do another one a little more complicated. Now instead of linear, we're going to do a quadratic. G of t is equal to negative 4t squared plus 4t plus 8. Let's evaluate this function. Let's say we're going to do it for t equals, let's just make it 2. For t equals 2. So now we're going to have g of 2. Notice I replaced the t here. And then everywhere I see a t in my expression, I'm going to replace that with a 2, but I'm going to do it in parentheses. Plus 4 times 2 plus 8. Notice how this square is part of the variable, but when you plug in the 2, you put it in parentheses and put the square on the outside. The calculator will know what to do. Let's go ahead and evaluate this function now. Let the calculator do the work. So I'm going to have, this is a negative 4. It's not a minus sign. We're not subtracting 4. It's the sign of the number 4. So we use this key, which is a plus or minus key. We're going to put a, let me clear that, sorry. We're going to put a negative, and then 4, parentheses, 2, close parentheses. You're going to have a key on your calculator that looks like x squared. Mine looks a little bit different than yours, but this means to square the term. This little caret means 2 to the exponent of 2. Then we're going to add 4 times our value for t in parentheses, and then our final number is 8, so plus 8. I'm going to press equal. Work is done for me. It actually evaluates to 0. So g of 2 is actually equal to 0. One more for practice. H of v. H of v is equal to negative 0.25 v squared plus 12t. And you see here there was a mistake, so I want you to erase that t. And I want you to replace it with a v. This would make no sense if we had a t in there, but we had no value for t. So this is 0.25 v squared plus 12v. If I've already corrected it in your flip book, then don't pay attention to that error. All right, so let's take a look. How about, let's evaluate it for v is equal to, let's do a negative in this one. So negative 3. So now we have h of negative 3 is equal to negative 0.25. My v variable goes in parentheses plus 12 times negative 3. And again, you can see this might take you a few moments, especially if you struggle with these skills or struggle with them in previous years. It might take you a few moments to put this in your calculator. And when you do it in individual steps, you're more likely to make mistakes. Let's use the calculator that you got from the library. Hopefully you picked one up. And let's go ahead and put this in. This is a negative 0.25, so I'm going to use my plus minus key, negative 0.25, open parentheses. Again, this is not minus 3, class. This is a negative 3. It's being multiplied by the 0.25, so I'm going to use my plus minus key. That's a negative 3. Now I'm going to square it. And now I've got plus. I know you can't see this, but this is plus 12. Open parentheses. Again, we're going to put a negative 3 in there. close parentheses. Take a look at my work. This looks just like my expression, except for I've plugged in -3 in the two places that I had the variable v. Let's press equal. And we've got -38.25. So this evaluates to -38.25. Again, all our issues with negative signs, positive signs, squaring, multiplying, if we put it in the calculator the right way, it's going to evaluate it properly. If you put it in the wrong way, if you don't put parentheses in there, you're going to find out you're going to be getting wrong answers. So make sure you use parentheses whenever you plug a value for a variable into an equation or an expression.